A woman is chained on all fours in the center of the Hippodrome of Constantinople. Iron shackles bind her wrists and ankles. She is naked except for torn rags. Her back is marked with fresh lash wounds. 50,000 people fill the stone seats, rising up on all sides. They are screaming, laughing, placing bets. Behind her, she can hear something approaching. Heavy footsteps, snorting breath. The crowd's noise changes, gets louder, more excited. She turns her head enough to see guards leading a massive bull through the arena gates. The animal is enormous. Over 1,000 pounds of muscle and horn. It is being driven directly toward her. This is not an execution. This is what the Byzantines called entertainment. And if you watch until the end, you will discover exactly what happened when that bull reached her. Her name is Helena. She is 23 years old, a member of a noble family aligned with the blue faction. Right now, she can feel the hot sand of the arena floor burning her knees and palms. Constantinople is in summer. The sun is merciless. She has been kneeling here for 2 hours already. The iron shackles have cut into her wrists. Blood runs down her forearms and drips into the sand. The crowd noise is overwhelming, a roar that never stops. 50,000 voices merged into something inhuman. She can smell herself. Sweat and fear and blood. She can smell the arena. Ancient sand that has soaked up blood for 3 centuries. Old death mixed with fresh. She can hear the bull getting closer, the sound of its hooves on stone, the guards shouting commands, the crack of whips driving it forward. Her breathing is coming fast and shallow. Panic is setting in. She wants to run, but the chains hold her in place. She is positioned exactly where they want her, facing away from the approaching animal. Unable to see it, only hear it getting closer and closer. The crowd is chanting now, rhythmic, coordinated. She cannot make out the words over the roar, but she knows they are not cheering for her survival. They paid to see something happen, something that will be talked about for years, something that will make other women think twice before opposing the Green faction. Helena does not yet know that 3 other women have already died in this arena this week. She does not know that what is about to happen to her has been carefully planned by men who understand exactly how to destroy a person without killing them. She does not know that she will survive this day, but wish for the rest of her short life that she had not. What she does know is that the bull is almost behind her now. She can feel its breath. Hot and wet on her back, she starts screaming. Here is what they never taught you about the Byzantine Empire. You know about the beautiful mosaics and the soaring domes of Hagia Sophia. You learned about Constantine and Justinian and the preservation of Roman law. But you never learned that the Hippodrome of Constantinople was a slaughterhouse, where political enemies were destroyed in front of cheering crowds for over 1,000 years. You never heard about the systematic use of public humiliation and torture as instruments of state control. And you definitely never discovered the specific methods Byzantines used to break women who threatened the political order. Tonight you will learn why the Hippodrome was not just an arena for chariot races, but a theater of calculated cruelty. How the faction system turned citizens into participants in atrocities, and why the single most brutal spectacles in Byzantine history targeted women specifically. The reason this history has been sanitized will show you exactly how empires hide their darkest practices behind claims of civilization and Christianity. Hit that like button and subscribe if you want to know the hidden truths history tried to bury. Stay with us, because what I reveal at the end about Helena and the bull will shock you. Comment where you are watching from. Now, let us continue, because this gets much darker. The Hippodrome of Constantinople was not like Roman arenas. It was something more sinister. Built in the 3rd century and expanded by Constantine in 330 AD, it became the political and social center of the Byzantine Empire. The structure was massive, over 400 meters long, 100 meters wide, rising stone seats that could hold 100,000 spectators, though 50,000 was more typical. At one end stood the Kathisma, the imperial box where emperors sat to watch. The arena floor was fine sand imported from Egypt, expensive, specially chosen. Around the outer walls ran corridors and chambers, storage for equipment, holding cells for prisoners. And beneath everything, a network of tunnels and rooms that most citizens never saw. This was not just entertainment architecture, it was infrastructure for state terror. You need to understand the faction system to understand what happened in that arena. Byzantine society was divided between two groups, the Blues and the Greens. Originally, these were chariot racing teams, sports fandom. But by the 5th and 6th centuries, they had evolved into something far more dangerous: political parties, religious movements, street gangs, military forces, social identities. If you were born into a blue family, you were blue for life. Same with green. The factions controlled neighborhoods, ran protection rackets, maintained private armies. They had their own uniforms, their own meeting halls, their own underground prisons. When faction violence erupted, the streets of Constantinople became war zones. Hundreds could die in a single night of rioting. And the Hippodrome was where faction loyalty was most visible, most important, most dangerous. When you attended races, you sat in your faction's section, wore your faction's colors, cheered only for your faction's chariots. Any perceived disloyalty could get you killed, not by authorities, by your own faction members who saw you as a traitor. This system gave emperors a tool. They could manipulate faction rivalries to control the population, promise favor to one faction to keep them loyal, threaten the other faction to keep them compliant, use both factions against each other to prevent them from uniting against imperial authority. And when political enemies needed to be destroyed publicly, the Hippodrome provided the perfect venue. Tens of thousands of witnesses, faction members eager to participate, an arena literally designed for spectacular violence. Let me be clear about something. This was not ancient history to the Byzantines. This was not barbarism they had evolved beyond. This was deliberate policy in a Christian empire that claimed moral superiority over pagan Rome. So Helena was trapped, born into a blue family, engaged to marry a blue official. Her family had wealth and status within their faction. But in 532 AD, tensions between blues and greens had reached a breaking point. The Emperor Justinian had angered both factions through heavy taxation and religious persecution. For once, blues and greens united against him. The result was the Nika riots. And what happened in the Hippodrome during those riots was the single largest stadium massacre in human history. January 18th, 532 AD. The Hippodrome is packed. Chariot races are scheduled, but no one is watching the track. Both blues and greens are chanting the same word, Nika. Victory. Not for their chariots, against the emperor. They are demanding Justinian abdicate, demanding he remove corrupt officials, demanding tax relief. The emperor is in the Kathisma. He can hear them, 50,000 people calling for his removal. This has never happened before. Blues and greens united, chanting together. This is not a riot yet. This is a political demonstration, a show of unified opposition. Justinian sends officials to negotiate. They enter the arena. The crowd shouts them down, refuses to disperse. The officials retreat. Report to the emperor that the situation is deteriorating. Justinian makes a decision, one that will define his reign, one that will result in more deaths in a single day than most ancient battles. He orders the imperial guards to seal the gates. All of them. Every exit from the Hippodrome. 50,000 people are now trapped inside. They realize what is happening. The chanting stops. Confusion spreads, then fear, then panic. People rush toward the gates, find them locked, barred from outside. They are trapped in the arena with an emperor who has decided to solve his political problem in the most direct way possible. You are probably wondering what happened next. Let me tell you. Justinian had called in his best general, Belisarius, a military genius who had conquered Vandal Africa and would later reconquer Italy. Belisarius entered the Hippodrome through the imperial passage with 3,000 soldiers, heavy infantry, armed with swords and spears. No bows, no ranged weapons. This was going to be up close. Personal, methodical, the soldiers formed a line across the arena floor, began advancing on the crowd. The people in the stands had nowhere to go, no weapons, no armor, no training. Most were civilians, merchants, craftsmen, laborers, families who had come to watch races. They tried to climb the walls, tried to break through the sealed gates. Some jumped from the upper tiers, 30 feet down onto stone, breaking bones, dying on impact. The soldiers reached the stands and began the killing. Systematic, efficient, moving row by row through the sections, stabbing anyone they could reach, men, women, children, the elderly. No discrimination, no mercy. This went on for hours. The screaming could be heard across the city. People trapped in upper sections watched the soldiers work their way up toward them, knowing their turn was coming. Unable to escape, some fought back with bare hands, were cut down immediately. Some begged for mercy, were killed anyway. Some simply stood there, frozen in shock as soldiers approached, were stabbed where they stood. The sand turned red, then muddy with blood. Bodies piled up in the aisles between sections. The soldiers had to climb over corpses to reach people trying to hide behind them. By nightfall, 30,000 people were dead. 30,000. In a single building, in a single day. The largest stadium massacre in ancient history. Justinian had solved his political problem. No more unified opposition. No more blue and green alliance. The survivors would remember what happened when you challenged imperial authority, would remember that the emperor could and would kill tens of thousands of his own people in their own social space to maintain power. If you are feeling sick right now, that is appropriate. This actually happened. We know because multiple Byzantine historians recorded it. Procopius, Marcellinus, John Malalas. The numbers vary slightly. Some say 25,000. Some say 35,000, but all agree it was tens of thousands killed in the Hippodrome during Nika. But the massacre was not the only thing that happened that day. While soldiers killed the crowd, Justinian's officials went through the stands, identifying specific individuals, political enemies, faction leaders, wealthy families who had supported the opposition. These people were not killed. They were pulled from the crowd, dragged down to the arena floor, held for special treatment. And among them were women, wives and daughters of blue and green officials who had called for Justinian's removal. These women had committed no crime except being related to the wrong people. What happened to them in the days after the massacre shows how the Byzantines used gender-specific humiliation as political terror. Remember this detail. It becomes crucial when we return to Helena and what happened with that bull. 73 women were arrested after the Nika riots, all from noble families, all affiliated with opposition factions. Most had done nothing except attend races with their families. But the empire needed to send a message. Not just about political opposition, but about social hierarchy, about proper behavior for women of rank, about the consequences of being on the wrong side. These women were held in the chambers beneath the Hippodrome for 3 days. Denied food, denied water, denied basic dignity. Then on the 4th day, they were brought up into the arena, one at a time. The Hippodrome was open again. Smaller crowd this time, maybe 10,000, carefully selected, loyal citizens, people who needed to see the consequences of disloyalty. The women were marched through the arena gates. The crowd noise changed, got louder, more excited. These women had worn silk and gold 4 days ago. Now they wore rags, or less. Their hair had been cut off, not styled, hacked off with knives, irregular, humiliating. Some had been beaten, visible bruises and cuts. They were paraded around the arena track, walking in a line, guards on either side. The crowd was encouraged to shout, to insult, to throw things, rotten food, stones, filth. The women had to walk the entire circuit, 400 meters, in front of thousands of people, being pelted and mocked. Some collapsed, were dragged to their feet, forced to continue. Some cried. Some maintained dignity through silence. All were broken by the end. After the walk, they were brought to the center of the arena, made to kneel. A herald read their crimes, supporting treason, harboring rebels, defying imperial authority. Crimes they had not actually committed, crimes of association, of family, of faction, loyalty. Then their punishment was announced: exile, confiscation of property, permanent social disgrace. They were led away, sent to distant corners of the empire. The message was clear: women who failed to control their men, who failed to stay out of politics, who failed to remain properly submissive, would be stripped of everything: rank, wealth, dignity, identity, in front of as many witnesses as possible. This same pattern appears throughout Byzantine history whenever women are perceived as threats to order. But the Nika riots established something else. They established that the Hippodrome was no longer just an entertainment venue. It was an execution ground, a place where enemies of the state could be destroyed publicly. And Byzantines developed specific methods for maximum psychological impact. One of these was blinding. Byzantines perfected blinding as political punishment. It was surgical, precise, designed to remove someone from power without killing them. If you blinded a rival, they could not claim the throne, could not lead armies, could not threaten you, but they remained alive, as a warning, as a reminder, as a visible symbol of what happened to those who reached too high. And many blindings happened in the Hippodrome, in front of crowds, as public spectacle. Let me tell you about one specific case: the blinding of Emperor Romanos IV in 1071. Romanos had lost a battle to the Turks, was captured, ransomed back to Constantinople. His political enemies saw an opportunity. They deposed him, declared a new emperor. But Romanos still had supporters, still had legitimacy. So they brought him to the Hippodrome, announced his crimes: treason, incompetence, endangering the empire. Then the executioner approached with a bronze rod, heated until it glowed red. The crowd fell silent. This part required attention. Romanos was held down by 4 guards, his head locked in position. The executioner placed the glowing bronze against his eyes. First the right, held it there for 3 seconds. The eyeball ruptured. Fluid hissed and steamed. The smell of burning flesh spread through the arena. Then the left eye. Same process. Romanos screamed throughout. The crowd watched, some in horror, some in fascination, most in silence. Understanding that this could be them, if they chose the wrong faction, backed the wrong emperor, made the wrong political choice. When it was done, Romanos was led away, blind, broken. He lived another 2 years in a monastery, died of infection from the wounds. But those 2 years he served his purpose. Every time someone saw the blind former emperor, they remembered. They remembered what happens when you lose, when you fall from power, when you threaten those above you. And here is what makes this even worse. The blinding was not done by a professional executioner. It was done by a common soldier, a man with no medical training, no expertise, no precision. The goal was not clean removal of sight. The goal was maximizing pain, maximizing visible damage, maximizing the horror for the audience. Sometimes the heated metal was applied multiple times. Sometimes different implements were used. Hooks to remove the eyeballs completely, knives to cut them out. Acid poured directly into the sockets. Byzantine chronicles describe dozens of variations, each one more brutal, each one performed in public, each one designed to remind citizens that the empire owned their bodies, could modify them, mutilate them, destroy them at will. And if you were important enough, your destruction would happen in front of thousands, would become a story told for generations, would become a warning carved into collective memory through the medium of your ruined body. But blindings were quick, over in minutes. The Byzantines developed other methods that lasted longer. That gave crowds more to watch, more to remember. One of these involved chariots. The vehicles that raced around the hippodrome track could also be used for execution. Rebels or captured enemies would be tied to the back of a chariot, arms and legs bound, rope around the torso. Then the horses would be driven. Not at racing speed, slower, more controlled. The body would be dragged around the track, 400 meters. On sand and stone, the friction tore skin, broke bones. The person died slowly, piece by piece. Sometimes they made multiple laps. Sometimes the chariot stopped halfway, and guards would check if the victim was still alive. If yes, they continued. If no, the body was dragged the rest of the way anyway. As an example, as a warning, as a spectacle that imprinted itself on everyone who watched. These executions were rare, reserved for the worst offenses: high treason, assassination attempts, rebellion against the emperor. But when they happened, the entire city knew about it. The hippodrome would be packed, standing room only. People wanted to see, needed to see. The empire made sure they saw. The documents I am about to reference reveal methods that historians rarely discuss publicly. But chariot executions and blindings were individual punishments, designed for specific criminals. The Byzantines also developed methods for groups, for categories of people who needed to be controlled. One category that appears repeatedly in the chronicles is disgraced noblewomen, women who had committed adultery or been accused of witchcraft or opposed the wrong faction or simply angered the wrong powerful person. These women could not be executed without cause. They had families, connections, rights under Byzantine law. But they could be humiliated, degraded, displayed, and the hippodrome provided the venue. The process was called procession of shame. It had specific steps. First, the woman would be arrested, her crime announced publicly. Then she would be held in the underground chambers for several days. During this time, certain preparations would be made. Her hair would be cut or shaved completely. Her clothing would be replaced with sackcloth or removed entirely. She would be denied food and water to ensure she looked weak and defeated. Then came the public display. She would be brought into the arena, usually on a race day, between events. Entertainment for the crowd. She would walk the circuit of the track, guards on either side. Her name would be announced, her crime listed. The crowd would react, shouting, jeering, throwing refuse. The woman had to complete the circuit, had to walk slowly enough that everyone got a good look, had to remain upright no matter what was thrown at her. At the end, she would kneel in the center of the arena. A herald would read her sentence, usually exile, sometimes confinement to a convent, rarely execution. The goal was not to kill her, but to destroy her socially, to make her an example, to show other women what happened when you stepped outside acceptable bounds, when you threatened the political order, when you forgot your place. Let me show you how this connects to what is happening today. If you're still listening, comment number 1 below to let me know you're here. Like the video and subscribe to the channel to show me your support if you haven't already. Now let's continue. Several Byzantine empresses used the hippodrome specifically to destroy female rivals. Theodora, Justinian's wife, the empress during the Nika riots. She had risen from poverty to power. Started life as an actress, possibly worse. Married the future emperor. Became one of the most powerful women in Byzantine history, but she never forgot the women who had looked down on her, who had mocked her low birth, who had called her unworthy. When she gained power, she destroyed them. 3 documented cases exist. 3 noble women who had insulted Theodora before her marriage. All 3 were brought to the hippodrome within a year of Justinian taking power. All 3 were subjected to processions of shame, stripped, shorn, paraded, humiliated, in front of the same crowds who had once seen them in silk and jewels sitting in the best seats. Theodora made sure she was present for these displays, sitting in the kathisma, watching, making eye contact with the women as they walked past, making sure they knew exactly who had ordered this, who had the power now, who controlled their fate. 2 of the 3 died in exile. The 3rd entered a convent and was never heard from again. Theodora had erased them. Use the hippodrome to demonstrate that past insults were not forgotten, that she could reach anyone, destroy anyone, no matter their family or former status. The message was received. No one spoke against Theodora after that. No one dared. But Theodora's vengeance was at least personal, based on real insults, real history. Many uses of the hippodrome for humiliation were purely political, calculated terror. One method that appears in multiple chronicles is what historians call mock coronation, when rebels were captured, when usurpers failed, when political movements were crushed. The leaders would be brought to the hippodrome for ritual humiliation before execution. This was not just killing, this was theater. The rebel would be dressed in imperial purple, the color reserved for emperors, would be given a fake crown, cheap metal, sometimes a circle of thorns, Christian imagery. The parallels to Christ were intentional, mocking. The fake emperor would be paraded into the arena, announced with fake fanfare. The crowd would laugh, would jeer, would understand they were watching a performance, watching power assert itself through mockery. The rebel would be forced to sit on a chair in the arena center, pretending to hold court. Guards would approach, pretend to bow, then strike him, beat him, still in the crown and robes, still pretending to be emperor, until the beating became real, until blood soaked the purple robes, until the crown fell off, until the rebel could no longer stand. Then the real execution would begin, sometimes beheading, sometimes blinding and then slow death, sometimes innovation, whatever sent the strongest message, whatever would be remembered and repeated, whatever would make the next potential rebel think twice before challenging imperial authority. You were right to be suspicious about how civilized Byzantium really was. So why did ordinary people participate in this system? How did citizens of a Christian empire watch these spectacles without revolting against them? The psychology is complex but comprehensible. First, there was faction loyalty. If the victim was from the opposing faction, you cheered their destruction. Blues loved seeing Greens humiliated. Greens loved seeing Blues suffer. This created automatic audience engagement, made spectators complicit, invested in the outcomes. Second was social control through fear. Anyone watching understood they could be next. Any misstep, any political mistake, any association with the wrong people. You could be the one in chains, the one being paraded, the one being blinded or beaten or humiliated. Better to be in the crowd than in the arena. Third was religious justification. The empire claimed divine sanction. The emperor was God's representative on earth. His enemies were God's enemies. Watching them punished was witnessing divine justice. Fourth was entertainment scarcity. The hippodrome was one of the few public entertainments available. Races happened regularly but were predictable. These special spectacles were rare, novel, exciting. People attended because there was nothing else to do, nothing else to see. This was the show. And fifth was simple human darkness, the capacity for cruelty that exists in all of us when given permission, when surrounded by thousands of others doing the same thing, when authority says this is acceptable, when the victim is othered enough. People can watch terrible things, can cheer for them, can participate enthusiastically. The Byzantines understood this, exploited it systematically, built an entire system of control around it. The hippodrome was not just an arena. It was a machine for manufacturing consent, for traumatizing populations into submission, for demonstrating that resistance was futile and would be punished spectacularly. Each small step of normalization made the next atrocity easier to accept. But there were limits, even in Byzantium. Methods that crossed lines even a population desensitized to regular violence found disturbing. Methods that were used rarely because they were so extreme. Methods that chronicles mention only in euphemisms and fragments, because describing them fully seemed impossible. One of these methods involved animals, not lions or bears like the Romans. The Byzantines were Christian. They frowned on beast hunts as pagan excess, but they found other uses for animals. Uses designed not to kill, but to degrade. To create psychological trauma more than physical harm. To break people through humiliation more than pain. Let me tell you what really happened to Helena, the woman we met at the beginning, chained on all fours in the arena with a bull approaching. You have waited for this. You have been promised an answer. Here it is. Now, here is the truth they tried to bury. Helena was not being executed. The bull was not going to gore her. The guards were not going to let it kill her. What they were going to do was let it terrify her. Let it approach from behind, where she could not see it clearly, could only hear it, smell it, feel its breath. The bull was trained, not wild. The guards controlled it with ropes and prods. They positioned it directly behind her, close enough that she could feel its weight, its presence. The crowd was screaming, betting on what would happen, whether she would break, whether she would beg, whether she would maintain silence. The bull was guided forward, not attacking, just present, looming, its massive head lowered toward her exposed back. The terror was absolute. Helena believed she was about to die, believed the bull was about to hurt her in the worst ways possible. The anticipation lasted minutes, felt like hours. The guards let it play out. Let the fear do the work. Let her imagination create torments worse than reality. Finally, they pulled the bull away. Led it back toward the gates. Helena collapsed, still chained, still on all fours, sobbing, shaking, completely broken. The crowd erupted, some cheering, some laughing, some in horrified silence. She had been destroyed without being touched, reduced to pure animal terror, stripped of dignity, of composure, of humanity, and she had to live with that. Had to know 50,000 people watched her break, watched her reduced to helpless prey, would remember, would tell the story, would use her name as shorthand for absolute humiliation. She was released the next day, sent into exile, died 2 years later, cause of death unrecorded. But the spectacle had achieved its purpose. Other women saw what happened. Other families understood the cost of opposition. Other nobles made different political choices, all because of a bull and a woman, and calculated psychological destruction performed as entertainment. This is what the Byzantines did. This is what Christian emperors approved. This is what happened in the Hippodrome for over 1,000 years. The ruins of the Hippodrome still exist in modern Istanbul. You can visit them. Walk on ground where 50,000 people screamed for blood. Stand where Helena knelt in chains. Touch stones that witnessed unimaginable cruelty. Most tourists have no idea. They see ancient architecture, photo opportunity, archaeological site. They do not know about the massacre, the blindings, the humiliations, the systematic terror. That history has been sanitized, covered over, reframed as merely political violence, unfortunate but understandable in context. No, this was calculated, systematic, designed with sophistication to control populations through spectacular cruelty. The Byzantines were not primitive barbarians. They were a literate Christian civilization with Roman legal tradition and Greek philosophical heritage. They did this anyway. They chose this, refined it, perfected it over centuries. And they are not unique. Every empire that concentrates power develops these methods. Every system that claims absolute authority finds ways to destroy opponents spectacularly. The Hippodrome was just one example. One venue, 1,000 years of evidence. The pattern exists everywhere when you know to look for it. So what do we learn from this? 3 things. First, civilization does not prevent atrocity. It provides better tools for committing it. Second, public participation in violence requires careful cultivation. Faction, loyalty, fear, religious justification, entertainment scarcity, permission from authority, but once cultivated, populations will watch almost anything. Third, the most effective terror targets identity more than body. Strip someone of dignity in public and you destroy them more completely than execution ever could. The Byzantines understood this. That is why so many hippodrome spectacles focused on humiliation, why they stripped and shaved and paraded and mocked, why they used animals for psychological terror, why they made sure tens of thousands witnessed the destruction. The body dies once. The humiliated person dies socially and lives with that death, sees it reflected in every eye that witnessed it, relives it every time the story is told. Remember those 3 things for Helena, who died at 25, still trapped in the moment when that bull approached her, still feeling helpless terror, still hearing 50,000 people laugh. For the 73 noble women paraded after Nika, for the 30,000 citizens massacred in the stands, for Emperor Romanos blinded before a crowd, for every rebel who wore a fake crown before execution, for every person tied to a chariot and dragged, for every victim of processions of shame and mock trials and faction violence. They deserve to be remembered as more than footnotes, more than statistics, more than examples of Byzantine brutality. They were people. They had names. Most of those names are lost, erased by the same empire that destroyed their owners. But we remember the system. We understand the pattern. We recognize it when it appears, and we refuse to let history sanitize the truth. The Byzantines claimed to be the continuation of Rome, the defenders of Christianity, the bastions of civilization against barbarism. They were also perpetrators of systematic public cruelty on a scale that rivaled or exceeded anything the pagan Romans did. That contradiction is important. It shows that religious and philosophical frameworks do not prevent atrocity. Sometimes they enable it, justify it, make it seem necessary, holy, righteous. Understanding Byzantine spectacles helps us understand how that works, how good people participate in terrible things, how crowds cheer for suffering, how empires maintain control through calculated terror disguised as justice. You just learned about some of the darkest chapters in Byzantine history, things that most textbooks gloss over or ignore completely. If you think this truth matters, if you believe these victims deserve to be remembered, then subscribe to this channel right now. Hit that subscribe button. These stories need to be told. Share this video, not for views, but because people need to understand what empires do when they have absolute power. Leave a comment. Tell me where you are watching from. Tell me which spectacle shocked you most. These are not just history lessons. These are warnings. The Hippodrome closed. The Byzantine Empire fell. But the methods survived. The patterns persist. Understanding them is how we recognize them, how we resist them, how we refuse to be the crowd that cheers. Next time, I will tell you about the hidden practices of the Spanish Inquisition that make Byzantine methods look almost merciful. Another story, buried in euphemisms and fragments. Another truth that powerful institutions tried to erase. You will not want to miss it. The stones of the Hippodrome, remember. The dust of that arena contains the remains of thousands of forgotten victims. Their voices were silenced. Their names were erased. But their suffering was real, and by speaking their stories we resurrect them. By learning their fates we honor their memory. By understanding what was done to them, we ensure it has meaning beyond their pain. They were not just victims. They were warnings. They were lessons written in blood and terror and humiliation. They were proof that civilization can coexist with cruelty. that Christianity can justify atrocity, that good people can watch evil and cheer, and they were proof that empires always hide their methods, always sanitize their history, always present themselves as more civilized than they were. Do not let them. Do not accept the sanitized version. Demand the truth. Learn the real history. Remember the real victims, because the price of forgetting is always higher than the price of knowing, even when knowing is ugly. A woman is chained on all